Welcome to the Ultra Origins series, where we hear from runners who have recently finished their first ultra or completed a new distance. In these conversations, we celebrate regular people who are doing hard things. There's a lot we can learn from and be inspired by from people just like you. In this episode, we speak with Scott Imlay, who recently completed his first 200-mile ultra marathon at Bigfoot after rekindling his running journey in his 50s. Scott talks about how a healthcare scare led him to embrace endurance sports and how his journey evolved from triathlons to tackling one of the toughest ultras in the country. Well, Scott, it's so great to have you here on Ultra Origins. I was so lucky to be able to see you at Bigfoot 200 when I was volunteering at the Twin Sisters aid station, and you came through, and it was good to see your face again. And so we got to chatting over email, and you said that this was your first actual finish of a 200. And so I know you've been around the community for a while, but I just want to welcome you to the show and, introduce you to the audience. So welcome. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into running?
Sure. So, I ran as a kid in junior high and then again in college just for fun, doing 10Ks and such. But pretty much quit running after that, with family, and it's kind of the standard story, right? I get busy. And then my early 50s, I had kind of a health scare. I think this is also a fairly common story.
Yeah.
And I had some chest pains. It turned out to be not the heart, but of course a cardiologist checks you out, and he said, well, your heart's fine, but if you don't do something, you'll have a heart attack before you're 60. Mm-hmm. I had high blood pressure and all the bad things, right? And so I said, okay, I need to start doing something. And what I've done is running. But I had tried to do running, to get back into running on several occasions. And in your 50s, you're a little more fragile, especially when you've gained about 60 pounds. And I kept hurting myself. And by the time you're done resting, you're back to where you started. So I actually started with triathlons. The thinking being, if I can't run, I can bike and swim, and it worked out actually, and keep the health benefits coming. And then eventually you kind of harden your tendons and muscles to the point that you can actually run. And so that's what I did. That was in 2013, I think.
How old were you when you did your first triathlon? How old were you?
I was 55.
Okay.
So is that right? Yeah, 54 maybe. Yeah, okay. So early, mid-50s. Okay. And, of course, started very short triathlons and then worked up to where I was eventually doing Ironman triathlons. I did a couple of those in 2017 and 2019, I think. I was in it was an online team of people who did triathlons, and a couple things happened. One, my daughter got real sick. She was my adult daughter, but she was living with us at the time. And so I worked in Bellevue, Washington, and she was in the hospital in Everett, Washington. And so I was driving like 3 or 4 hours a day, depending on traffic. Yeah. And so what I would do is listen to podcasts to keep myself entertained. Okay. And I kind of listened to all the triathlon podcasts and eventually ran out of things that I hadn't listened to. And so I found this podcast called The Ginger Runner Live. If you know Ethan. And so he had runner in the name. So I thought, okay, well, that might be interesting. And then that was my kind of introduction to ultras, really, was listening to his podcast.
That's amazing.
And I enjoyed that and eventually did my first ultra in 2019. It was actually the Deception Pass 50K.
You passed 50K in 2019. I ran that race. I was there that day.
Oh, were you?
That's great. I'm so happy to know that I was there when you ran your first 50K.
Yeah, I don't remember. Well, I wouldn't have known you, I guess, but
Small world,
I don't remember seeing you. Yeah, it was nice. I mean, a couple things. I had done, some marathons because of the Ironman, so some marathons when you're tired. But boy, those hills it's a very different experience, right? That was hard for me to do the 50K, even though I was in reasonably good shape from the triathlons.
Scott, was that your first trail run then?
Yes, I had done practicing on trails.
Yeah, okay.
Mostly since I worked in Factoria area, I would go up to Cougar Mountain area. to do practicing on running on trails. But that was my first race. Yeah.
I see. So when you were getting ready for Deception Pass 50K, you knew it was going to be a trail race. You were doing your training then on some trails as you got ready for that first 50K.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, good.
I didn't take it seriously enough, though. I didn't realize how much harder it's going to be with that much vertical gain and loss. Totally wiped out my quads on the descents. And had to, I was in a lot of pain after that. I learned my lesson.
Pretty good race to do as your first 50K, though, in some ways, because I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places that you could be in Washington State. It's at the top end of Whidbey Island and near Fidalgo Island. And for those of you who don't know, around here, there's a series of islands up there, and this course is right along the water. And sometimes it goes across a beautiful bridge. It's got some rocky, mountainy type bits, as well as lots of good ups and downs, but lots of forest. So what a beautiful place to experience your first 50K. It must have been such a different vibe than the kind of racing you had done up until then.
Very different. One of the things in the triathlons, in the run, you talk to people, but most of the time it's just heads down, going hard, right? Okay. But in the trail runs, it's a community experience, right? You end up talking to a lot of people, and maybe more so in the longer ones, because you're moving slower, but still, that was a very cool experience to get. It's more of a community feel, more social. Yeah. And then, of course, you're in just a beautiful setting, too. That makes a difference, too. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I kind of fell in love with it at that point. I still had some triathlons on the calendar in 2020, Ironman St. George, but, of course, it was canceled right, because of COVID. And then I had another one in the summer, was also canceled. Finally, the group of us who had planned on doing St. George decided we were going to go do the Grand Canyon, rim to rim. This group, you might know some of them, included Peter Noyes, Kevin Goldberg, oh my God, Gabe Peterson, and Tim Kronk, who I didn't know at the time, but they were all these 200 guys, right? Who were also doing triathlons at that point. Okay. And so that was kind of my introduction to the concept of 200 milers. And actually from then on, that was my goal, was to make it to 200. So that was in 2020. I ended up only doing the one trip across because I wasn't quite prepared for the amount of vertical gain and the altitude. I got pretty sick, gastrointestinal issues. Fortunately, we had somebody on the North Rim. This was in the end of October. One of our buddies decided he would come crew for us, and he was in the North Rim, and both Peter Noyes and I ended up going back with him. Peter hurt his hamstring, and I was just sick. Yeah, that was beautiful too. What an experience in the Grand Canyon, and that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you end up doing 24 miles that day then?
Yeah, I think I ended up doing 24, and what is that, about 7,000 feet of elevation gain? Yeah, okay. It's 5,000 going south, 7,000 going north, I believe, yeah.
Still a big
something
day.
Like that. Anyway, it's incredibly beautiful and very hot. We started in the morning, and it was actually freezing on the South Rim by the time we got down to the river. So it was very early. It was just getting light when we got down to the river. It was 85 degrees. Oh, wow. And so it was, I don't know what it ended up being in the box, the hottest area, but I'm sure it was pushing into the 90s somewhere. But yeah, I guess that's the nature of the Grand Canyon, to get both the hot and the cold. Yeah. But that was fun.
Did you know at that point that they were kind of into 200s, or did you learn about it during this run? I mean, what an exciting opportunity to hear about 200s from those guys.
I had heard them briefly talking about it, or on some of the message boards and stuff, but I didn't know much about it. No, it was there that I heard them talking more, and yeah, that was fun actually to hear about it. And yeah, I think Gabe, for instance, or maybe it was Peter, said that they had finished Moab 240, and then on their way home they had done the rim to rim. It's incredible to think about, right? Yeah. That somebody would do that. But yeah, hanging out with them there was when I really got my introduction to it.
Okay, so at this point, we're talking October of 2020. Have you done one ultra? You've done one 50K, and now you've done this rim to rim. Did you have to change a mindset or change your plans in any way from the way you've been running up until this point to what you see in the future as you want to get towards this 200 goal? So did you make any changes kind of early on to start making your way in that direction?
Oh, a lot more running on trails.
Mm-hmm.
The closest trail to me is actually Lord Hill.
That's where I run a
I
lot.
know you run there
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where I end up running a lot and focus on the old Lordy Hill, to try to really get the climbing strength up.
Yeah.
And because that really killed me in the Grand Canyon is how hard it was to climb the steep hills.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing is just really building up the volume. When I was doing the triathlons, I mean, you're spreading it across the three disciplines, right? And although I was doing maybe 15 hours to 20 hours a week during peak training, a large percentage of that was the bike. And then 3 or 4 hours of it was swimming. So that means I was maybe 6 or 7 hours of actual running. And I'm not a fast runner. By that point, I'm pushing 60. And so I actually do a lot of run walk during my training. So I'll run for a while and then walk for a bit so that it's easier on my body I can get a longer training period in for the same level of stress on the body.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I do. I still do some biking and some swimming, but not very much. It's mostly running now. Increasing the run volume quite a bit, up maybe 50, 60 miles a week.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the big change, I think. Since the pandemic, I've been working at home. So I run from home a lot and I don't have trails there. So I'm still running on roads a fair amount. It's what I have available. The other big thing I did is volunteering. And I started in 2021 volunteering at Bigfoot.
Okay.
And I've volunteered every year since, including this year. I did the course marking this year. So in addition to running the race.
Oh my God. I think I had heard that through the grapevine that you had done that. And to hear you confirm it, I'm so glad to hear that, because what an amazing thing and what an effort physically to have done the course before you ran the course.
Yeah, there's multiple teams, so I didn't do the whole course, but yeah. It was a good hunk of hiking, really, with a heavy pack. That's what that's what you're doing for the course marking. I think it's a good training. Well, first of all, you're covering a lot of the same trails.
Yeah.
And so you get the experience of, for instance, climbing over dozens of logs and under dozens of logs on Klickitat Trail and down through the Green Tunnel. But also, you have the heavy pack, which is heavier than I would normally run with in my training, but it's a little lighter than what I'm running with in the actual race. So, it's nice to get the shoulders and the back used to carrying that weight.
Yeah.
And it forces you to hike, which I have a tendency to run too much, I think, in my training.
Mm.
I'm running a lot more than I actually run in the race. And so with that much extra weight, you're hiking. And you're hiking fast because you want to cover 20 miles or something. You're going to do it again the next day.
Yeah.
So, you're practicing some of the things that you're going to be using in the race. And there's a little gap, at the end of course marking, it's like Monday and then the race starts Friday. So you have a little bit of time to rest and get ready.
So was it 20 miles that you course marked then?
I was leading one of the two teams, and our team did a little over 100 miles in 5 days, but I wasn't with all of that. Yeah. We kind of did a little different this year where we had some group of 3 people that were basically through hiking about 50 miles of it, and I was just running back and forth bringing them supplies. So I actually only covered about probably 55 miles this year. But you basically each day cover a section, depending on which sections you're doing. And so, like the first day, we covered Klickitat to Twin Sisters. And then I went over and we did Coldwater Lake. And actually, this is the other team that did that. They did Coldwater Lake to Elk Pass. So that was the longest one. That was like 40 miles. And I basically ran supplies for them to Norway Pass and Elk Pass. And then they went from there to Spencer Butte, and then helped mark from Spencer Butte on to Lewis River, and then up. Part of the way up the next section. I've seen most of the course. There's a couple sections I haven't seen, but I've been helping course mark for 3 years. So it's nice to, you get out there and get to see everything at a lower pace and a lower stress level.
So,
Nice.
a question I have is, so you got started volunteering 3 years ago in 21. What was your motivation for doing that? What brought this genius idea into your mind? Because I think it's so great. But why?
I guess I wanted to learn. The first volunteer was at Aid Station, was at Twin Sisters.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I first met you, although you probably don't remember me. You were pretty tired.
Yeah, I don't remember that moment, but I was pretty tired when I got to Twin Sisters that year.
Yeah, but so I was thinking, if you want to run this, you need to understand it a little more. And so it seemed like going to the aid station was a great way to really understand what people go through. And yeah, I mean, that was it. And it was actually a very special experience. Anybody who's thinking about doing one of these, you should do some volunteering. It's really inspirational, actually. You see people coming in they look like they're on the edge of death. They're exhausted, and they put themselves back together. And, hour or two later, they're gone, and they're doing the next 15 or 20 miles. You learn that's something you have to figure out how to do.
Right.
And that even the best runners come in really low points sometimes, and yet they still go on and they finish. And that's been one of the hard things for me is especially with gastrointestinal issues. Just keep going when you're sick.
Yeah.
But you sort of have to do that, because it seems like everyone gets them. Maybe there's somebody out there that doesn't get nauseated.
Certainly, yeah.
Nice.
Certainly very common. A lot of us have that issue at some point during the race, you're right? Yeah. And then your experience of volunteering and seeing all those runners who were really struggling, a lot of them might turn around when they head, before they head back out. So you could sort of see that revival from the calories or sleep or whatever. But that sort of experience of seeing those runners in that state is so much more raw than you're going to get from what you would have learned from watching videos on YouTube or reading people's accounts or blogs or magazines. Yeah, what an interesting way to see what you are going to face yourself at some point in the future when you finally got into this. Was it scary at all to you, or was it inspiring?
It was mostly inspiring. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you think, I don't know. I'm not sure I actually thought, okay, I'm going to be in that situation. Oh. It wasn't until I really was in that situation I said, oh yeah, I've seen people here before.
Yeah, right.
But it was mostly inspiring. I was thinking, well, wow, these people are really doing very difficult things, and they're very strong individuals. They're very motivated. Mm-hmm. And so that was very cool, to see, and also just to see how they did it. I remember, it wasn't the first year, but Francis Picard came in. Do you know Francis?
Yeah, he's a part of that whole crowd that you were saying from your Grand Canyon trip. He's friends with all of them. Yeah, I know Francis too.
Yeah. And so Francis came in, and he was really pretty wiped out. And he said, do you have Coke? And I brought him a glass of Coke. And he said, can I just have one of the bottles? So these are like the 2-liter bottles.
Yeah.
And I swear he drank the whole thing.
Amazing.
And then he got up and he left.
Well, Coke really is a miracle drink. That is for sure.
Yeah. So I would recommend it, definitely, anyone who wants to run one of these, to volunteer for a year or two. And I had the time because I was really building up my fitness. I couldn't have done a 200 the first year. It would have been just a waste of time and money.
Did you already have in your mind what year you were going to sign up?
Yeah, my thinking was 2023. Okay. And that's actually when I signed up for Tahoe. Was 2023. So that would have been a couple of years.
Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to do a 100 just to prove to myself that I could.
Okay.
And so I did a couple 100s in 2023, leading up to Tahoe. And of course, Tahoe ended up being delayed that year because of the snow. And that worked okay for me schedule-wise. So, yeah, I went there. I actually did the course marking there as well.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So I've seen, even though I haven't finished the course, I've seen the entire course at Tahoe. It's a beautiful course there. So, yeah, that was the plan. I'd actually been to Tahoe the year before to do just volunteer. I volunteered at the headquarters that year.
Okay.
So, which, I mean, that's fun. You get to know people, but you don't get to see the runners so much. So I actually think, from somebody who was inspiring to do a 200, it's probably better to be at an aid station.
I was volunteering at Bigfoot this year. At the beginning, we were at headquarters collecting all of the gear that we needed to bring up to the aid station, and it was really fascinating to see sort of behind the scenes what's going on at headquarters with the amount of supplies they had laid out and organized, and everything was prepped for us to take up to the aid station. I can imagine that while you don't get to interact with the runners, that would be an interesting experience of logistics and understanding what it actually takes to put on a race by being a headquarters.
Yeah, it was an eye opener. They have these two huge trailers that they bring in that are stuffed to the gills, and you have to basically empty them entirely, rearrange things for the aid stations. We had to do a lot of cleaning of grills and things like that beforehand. And, you're filling, I don't even know how many those big water containers, and the food, kind of setting out. Yeah, I mean, it's a big effort. And, I know these races are really expensive, but you get behind the scenes, you can see why.
Yeah.
There's a lot of equipment. There's a lot of cost in food. And yeah, it's not an easy thing to put on. And it's not just twice as hard as a 100, I'm sure, because you have to have sleep stations and all of these other things that, maybe you don't have to have it at 100. So yeah, it's a good experience to see what's actually happening behind the scenes. And it's hard work. Those folks are doing a lot of lifting and moving heavy stuff around and working late. They work later during the actual race, but leading up to it.
Okay, so you're looking at 2023, and that year you did a couple 100-milers to get ready for your first attempt at Tahoe. So
Yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit about your first experience running a 200 and what you learned during that first outing?
Yeah, it was the year that they delayed it. So it was in July, and it turned out to be a very hot day, the first day especially. I actually had the first couple days. And so I think it was like 80 degrees when we started at Heavenly.
Oh, wow.
And which is you're at 7,000 feet roughly.
Yeah.
And so, and a high that day down in South Lake Tahoe was 104. So it was a hot day. And they had that year, they changed it for this year, but that year they had fairly tight cutoffs in the first 60 miles. Worked out to about 3 miles an hour, which doesn't sound very fast, but you're doing a lot of climbing. And so I ended up, worried about the cutoffs. Let's put it that way, more than I should have been. And so I was pushing hard out to the first aid station at Armstrong Pass. I actually felt pretty good. That was mile, I don't know, it's 18 or 17 or 19, somewhere in there. And then pushing from there towards Housewife Hill, which is the first turnaround. And that's when it kind of went south for me, the climb out of Armstrong Pass. It was really hot at the aid station, and the climb was hot. And I started to get nauseated on the climb out. And you're up in the 9,000 foot range, I guess.
Yeah, it's hot.
I don't know if altitude had an effect on me or not. I think it was mostly the heat, but maybe the combination of the two.
Probably, yeah.
Got me very dehydrated. And I remember thinking there was a guy with me. We were hiking up, and he had been telling me he had done, I can't remember his name now, but he had done a couple of 200s. And he was a little younger than me, but not much. He was probably early 60s.
Okay.
And he finally just said, I'm going to sit down and cool down. And I didn't, and I think in retrospect, if I had just sat down, and gotten my core temperature down, my heart rate down, it would have been a game changer.
Okay.
But I didn't. And I got to where I couldn't drink anything. And then, of course, I ended up basically getting to Housewife Hill at about the cutoff, and I really couldn't continue on at that point. I was so dehydrated.
Gotcha.
So that was my experience, which is very disappointing because it was only a 50K really to Housewife Hill.
Yeah.
It's really a shame to go to a 200 miler and only do 50K of it. But I did learn that you have to maybe change your thinking and be willing to slow down now so that you can speed up later.
Right.
That was my big learn from that. If I'd been able to slow down enough to get my core temperature and heart rate under control, then I may have still been nauseated, but I would have been better off.
Yeah.
And probably gotten to Housewife Hill with enough time to make the turnaround.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to learn. The best way to learn that is by experiencing it, unfortunately. If you can just invest a few minutes to just stop and rest or whatever you need to do, it's a game changer. I've had similar situations when I'm really tired and I lie down for 10 minutes and then I'm so refreshed afterwards that I've passed people in my run after that who had passed me while I was sleeping. It's interesting how you feel like you're losing time by taking some of this time to slow down and stop and cool down and heart rate down. But actually, it's an investment in going faster later. It proves out time and time again.
Yeah. And I did that I made the same mistake at Bigfoot, actually.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Going out to Klickitat. But then I learned for the rest of the race.
Well, before we get to Bigfoot, I'm curious. Okay, so after DNFing at Tahoe, did you make a decision that you were going to go to Bigfoot the very next? Did you quickly make the decision that you're going to do Bigfoot the next year, or how did you kind of unwind the DNF and start to get training to get back into it again?
Yeah, I did make the decision pretty much right away. It was too late to do Tahoe for the next year. That's probably what I would have done, but because of the way Tahoe worked. The actual race was in July, but the registration was done or the lottery entries were all done in June.
Right.
And so I hadn't done the lottery, so it was too late to try Tahoe again. So I thought, all right, I actually was looking, being in my mid 60s, my speed isn't that high, and let's put it that way. So I was kind of looking at the finisher rates for the different races for people that are Medicare eligible like myself, right? Mm-hmm. Tahoe actually had a fairly good finisher rate, as did Moab, but Bigfoot was lower. And so that's why I hadn't just done Bigfoot the first year. And I think it's probably because there's a lot of muscles required at Bigfoot. You have to do a lot of climbing over things. And of course, it's steep hills in a lot of them. So anyway, I decided I'm just going to go ahead and do Bigfoot. I did the course marking again and signed up for it. And then I actually also signed up for Moab this year, thinking, okay, I've got two of them. Hopefully I can finish one of them. Yeah. So I have Moab ahead of me this year in another month or so.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, that was my thinking is I really want to finish at 200. And I know it's going to be hard for me no matter what.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and sign up for a couple so that I have two shots at it. Yeah.
So as you started to train for your next 200, did you have in mind that you were actually training for two 200s that were going to be in fairly short succession?
I didn't. That would have been a good idea. I honestly didn't put a whole lot of thought into that, other than the fact that I was going to have some downtime after Bigfoot, and that I probably wasn't going to get a full build back before Moab. The hope, I think, is that the training for Bigfoot is still there to some extent. It doesn't fade entirely before Moab. Yeah, and so I had that in mind. But I hadn't really seen any suggestions on how to do it. I know a lot of people do the Triple Crown. Mm-hmm. You've done the Triple Crown.
Yeah.
So obviously people must have some strategy they use to handle this. Is there a strategy that you would recommend for something like that?
Well, I was actually having this conversation recently with a friend. And thinking back to 2022, when I did the Triple Crown, I don't think I really had much of a strategy. I kind of ran each of them as their own race with their own goals to finish and maybe finish under a certain time. But yeah, I didn't have that idea in mind. But I think that some people do have that strategy, especially the people who are slower intentionally. They don't sleep necessarily or spend as much time in aid stations. So they sleep less, but they move more, but they're moving slowly while they're moving. And so I think the interesting strategy of that is that your body gets beat up a lot less so that the recovery between is easier. You can bounce back faster. But yeah, I think you're right. Everyone has to have their own thing because you're going to need your own nutrition requirements to build back up. And how much training do you really need to maintain? Because there's not much you're going to do to do massive changes to your body, in the time between these races. So the training you've already done is the training. Now you just need to sort of move forward. But of course, the advantage you have after having finished one, looking at the next one, is you have the mental experience and all that you've done to actually learn how to finish a 200. That's what's going to be so important at Moab, because that's the experience that every other first time 200 doesn't have yet. And it's so valuable to have that kind of experience. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out for you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there was an awful lot I learned. I had my first trail nap. That I had no idea if I was going to be able to do a trail nap.
Yeah.
But I got so tired that I was falling asleep while walking. I was with the group at that point. And they just said, I'm going to lay down. And they decided they'd just lay down too. It's amazing how much difference that makes. And I was out the second I hit the ground. When you get that tired, I guess, you just go to sleep no matter what.
Did you set a timer, Scott? How did you make sure you didn't oversleep that 10-minute goal?
That one, I didn't set a timer. I was too tired to even think about it. I just laid down. And I think the people I was with actually woke up, and that kind of woke me up.
Gotcha. Okay.
Later on, I did more intentional trail naps, and then I would set a timer.
Okay.
I don't know. The timer kind of, it's a bit like, when you have an alarm clock and you wake up a couple minutes before the alarm goes off. I was kind of worried about the timer, I think. And so I was not sleeping quite as well. I don't know if that works the best for me or not. On the other hand, I don't want to sleep for 2 hours on the side of the trail.
Right.
Do you use a timer?
Yes, I typically do. But it also causes me a little bit of stress too, because what I really want is some kind of timer that automatically starts when I fall asleep. That way, when I set a 10-minute timer and I'm just lying there for a few minutes trying to fall asleep, I feel like, I'm feeling stressed because I'm wasting time. I need to go to sleep. But yeah, I do set a timer just because I think, like you say, I don't want to overdo it. And, the idea of a trail nap often is just a quick reset so you can get back moving again. It's not meant to be a multi-hour experience.
Oh, and I was surprised by how well it worked too.
Yeah.
10 minutes is obviously you're not getting REM sleep or a lot of the type of sleep that you eventually need, but apparently you're resetting the stuff that you do need to reset at that point, which is great.
So it sounds like you did multiple trail naps. Is that right?
Yeah. After that, so that was coming back from Klickitat the first trip back, and actually did another one on that leg. Actually there were 3 of us at that point. We were all just exhausted. And so that first one was just me saying I got to sleep, and the next one was more intentional, where another one of the group said I have to sleep, and I said, well, I could sleep too, and so we all kind of found a nice area and laid down for a while.
Did you also sleep at any of the sleep stations at the aid stations?
Yeah, so I slept at Klickitat the first time, but really wasn't able to. Maybe a tiny bit of sleep there. I was dealing with a lot of nausea at that point, and it was very loud, and there weren't any cots. There was just 2 cots, and they were taken. So I was trying to sleep in a chair.
Yeah.
Slept twice at Twin Sisters. On the second trip, I was going out, slept at Twin Sisters for maybe an hour, and then on the way back at Twin Sisters, maybe 2 hours at that point. Actually, by that point, it had started raining. So the last leg was a little chilly, descending through the green tunnel.
Did you have a strategy for your sleep going into Bigfoot?
My strategy going into it was to sleep at the aid stations. Yeah. And I hadn't really, I thought, well, if I have to, I'll try a trail nap, but I didn't really know if I could.
Yeah.
And so my strategy was to sleep at the aid station. So I brought earplugs and And actually, I slept fairly well at the aid stations, even except for Klickitat, which was real noisy and I wasn't in a cot. But when I had a cot, I slept fairly well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was the sleep strategy. I planned on, pretty much what I did, maybe an hour or two sleep at the aid stations. But that's kind of how it worked out. Twin sisters and then back at the start finish.
Okay.
And I did sleep at the start finish. That was the hardest place to leave.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I had a friend who was pacing me. She came up, I was sleeping in my car, and she came up and said, "Okay, Scott, we're going."
Yeah.
And so I couldn't really tell her no.
Yeah.
So that worked out well. That was the right time to have a pacer.
So you learned about trail naps. What else did Bigfoot teach you that will be coming in handy in your next 200 attempt?
I don't know if one interesting thing, this is maybe not helpful for other 200s, but the same trail going in different directions can be very different difficulty. Turns out that going from Twin Sisters to Klickitat is way harder than from going from Klickitat to Twin Sisters, even though it's pretty much the same elevation gain. It's just that climbs are steeper going out to Klickitat, and they're on this dirt and gravel that just slides right underneath your feet. And yeah, you can't just depend on the elevation profile to understand how hard a section's going to be. There's other factors. The nature of the dirt on the trail and stuff isn't there. You have to, I think the videos help, like your videos and others, give you a general idea, especially when, you say, well, the footing's really bad or whatever.
Right.
So that can be helpful. But yeah, just don't set your expectations too rigidly based on the elevation gain or loss. There's a lot of other factors that come into play.
You kind of have to be ready for anything in that way, because you don't know exactly what you're getting into. You have a little bit of a sense of the steepness maybe, but yeah, since you don't know what the footing's like, you really can't predict how you're going to go into the course for the first time or how it's going to go for you.
Yeah. And I had done that section 3 times in trail marking, but it had always been from Klickitat to Twin Sisters.
Right.
And so when I was running out, I was with a lady, and she said, "Oh, not another climb." And I said, "Well, I don't think this one's very bad." And it was a terrible climb. But when you're going the other way, the descent was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't think about it, what it would be like doing the climb when you're doing the descent. So,
did you learn anything? I'm curious if while you're doing Bigfoot, if you had any thoughts about how you wished you had trained differently. Is there anything that you wish you would have done differently in your training for Bigfoot, for next time?
Yeah, honestly, one of the things that happened to me was I got the ultra leans then in the last 10 miles.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't had it myself, but I have seen people with that.
Yeah, they're very odd in that you don't notice that you're leaning at first. Other people usually tell you, this happened to me twice now, and other people usually say, "Scott, you're leaning." And then you start thinking, well, the world is kind of crooked. But it is, I need to figure out a way to avoid them. I would like to figure out a way to avoid them. And I think a lot of it may be doing more core strength. I think maybe it's just, your body just gets beat down, especially when you're doing all the climbing over logs and under logs and stuff like that. Things you wouldn't normally do, and a lot of ultras you wouldn't do. So that would be one thing is really a lot more core strength. And I'm doing that now in preparation for Moab. At first, it doesn't hurt. The leans don't hurt. But after about maybe half hour, your muscles start to cramp up, usually back and side, and sometimes your hip. So something to be avoided at all costs if you can.
Yeah. And
I think I was at mile 190, and if I get that at mile 190 in Moab, that's going to be very bad news.
Yeah.
2 miles.
I've also heard that they are related to an electrolyte imbalance. Is it possible that you were getting dehydrated towards the end of Bigfoot, and that could have been a contributing factor?
Yeah, it's possible. I wasn't that dehydrated. I'm pretty sure of that. I was still peeing a lot.
Oh, okay.
And it looked normal. So I was not to the point where it was affecting my kidneys or anything like that. But I mean, I was probably a little dehydrated, sure. I've heard that too. Most of the research on it seems to be for cross-country skiers for some reason.
Oh, interesting.
Long-distance cross-country skiers. They've got like 5 different theories as to what causes it, from motor neuron fatigue to electrolytes to basic strength, I guess would be another one. It makes sense as you get older and you're losing muscle mass. Even when you try not to, you tend to lose a lot of muscle mass. And so it makes sense that your reserve of muscle mass is maybe not what it was when you're 10 or 15 years younger.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just trying to build the reserve up a little bit now. Of course, you always need to try to stay hydrated and keep the electrolytes in balance. I do struggle with that. I know other people probably do too, but once you start getting nauseated, it's hard to force yourself to drink the electrolytes.
Yeah. Well, and you did get sick at Bigfoot. Do I remember that right? I think I remember talking to you about that at Twin Sisters during one of your stops.
Yeah, I pushed way too hard out to Klickitat, and I made it there in about 14 hours, which if you do the math, there's no way I'm going to finish 4 times 14 hours. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I got there and I was actually feeling pretty good up until about a mile from the aid station. Then I started feeling nauseated. I was just throwing up every hour. So I got there a little after midnight and left at dawn, basically. And I honestly didn't know if I was going to, I was really struggling with whether I should leave the aid station. And then I noticed a group of mostly ladies at that point that were getting ready to go. And so I thought, I'm going to go or I'm not going to go.
Yeah.
And I walked over to them and said, do you mind if I tag along? And they were nice enough to let the old guys, leave the aid station with them.
Yeah.
And actually I ended up running the rest of the race with a couple of them. So that was really nice. I got to know some new people and real nice folks. And that helped me in a couple of ways. One is, as a group, they were pacing much better than I did, especially on the hills. I have a tendency to just hammer up the hills as hard as I can, even when I'm hiking. And some of those hills are steep enough that, for me at least, I was still getting my heart rate way up. And that's not what you need in a 200-miler.
Yeah,
you need to kind of keep everything under control. And so they did much better pacing than I did. And that was another big thing I learned is, take the hills. I actually used heart rate from then on. So if my heart rate gets above a certain level, then I probably need to slow down on the hills.
Okay.
Even if I'm walking, you don't want to slow down anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But yes, you probably do.
Yeah.
if it's hard. And that I suspect has some big hills and they're at altitude.
Yeah, that's right.
And you'll need to be careful at not pushing too hard at altitude.
That's right.
Yeah, so I got nausea. I didn't know. I had actually never worked my way out of nausea before. Every other race I'd been in, when I got nauseated, I finished nauseated.
Tell us what you did. What was your secret?
Well, I think the main thing was the pacing. I slowed down.
Okay.
And just kept drinking the electrolytes, the tailwind, and just forced myself to do that. Try to stay hydrated.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's just, I think it was a matter of time and pace. Keep your pace down and stay hydrated and just give yourself time.
So then you finally ended up with the leans, whereas you're coming in for the last return into Randall. It's about, you spent a lot of your last couple of years of your life training for and planning for a 200 finish. So as you're getting close to your first 200 finish, what was your excitement level like? How are you feeling about this accomplishment that you're about to have?
Oh, I was really excited. I mean, it was in pain, so that kind of moderated it a little. Excuse me. But yeah, I was very excited. And I was with another lady at that point, Cassidy, and so as she and I were kind of comparing notes and talking about it. We had been together since since Klickitat, really.
Okay.
It's the first time, so we've been together for 150 miles. So this is another one of those cases where you really get, somebody is a total stranger at the beginning is, you really get to know them pretty well by the end, which is really fun. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would have. There were times when I was really in a low spot and without somebody there, like in her case, or my friend Emily, who was pacing us. I'm not sure I would have continued.
Yeah.
And I think she had the same experience. She was when we were sleeping, I mentioned that it started raining when we were twin sisters the last time.
Mhm.
And she woke up and she burst into tears because it was raining. And she kind of said, well, I'm not sure I would have continued if you guys hadn't been there. There were three of us with her at that time. So yeah, that last section was pretty cold.
Yeah, I imagine.
Got it done. Yeah, so no, it was very exciting, and we ended up finishing together. And I was throughout. I was trying to work out a way to stretch my back and keep it from getting worse, and so I kind of had my poles behind my back in a certain way, and so I was just hiking it in at that point. I finished in 102 hours, so not quite DFL, but it was towards the end, which is fine. Just wanted to finish, and that was my goal. It was great.
Well, since you've been a part of the community at that point now, a few years, a lot of the other volunteers and staff know who you are. And so I'm sure you had a lot of people cheering you into the finish. And it probably felt like a nice community there to support you and to honor your finish.
Yeah, the headquarters folks were great. They were, even when I got there the first time, they all came out. Even Garrett came over to say hi and talk to me. And that was fun.
That's cool.
And Adam. So it was really good to have that level of support. I don't think Will would have let me not go out again the second time. Him and Imlay together were kind of pushing me out the door, pushing me out onto the road. So yeah, he did a lot of the course marking with me the last couple of years. So yeah, he really pushed, made sure I kept going.
Yeah, I feel like it must have been a pretty exciting thing to finally finish your first 200, and now you've got a little bit more than a month now until your next 200. So what are you doing in this in between time to stay motivated or active or whatever, nutrition, sleeping? What are you doing?
Yeah, I've actually started running again. I've been running here on vacation, and it's nice. I'm getting some heat acclimation out of that too, because if I run in the afternoon, it's about 90 degrees and 80% humidity. So the humidity will be different than Moab, but the heat will be there. And so I am running, I do maybe 3 or 4 miles a day, easy running, run, walk. And that's my plan, is just kind of slowly build that up until it's time to taper down. I don't think I'm not going to get up to my full 50 or 60 miles a week, I don't think. But I'll get up a little more than I am now. Really working on the core strength, try to avoid the leans. And, and other than that, just relaxing and enjoying life right now.
Good.
Looking a lot at the course, looking at the videos of people who've done Moab, trying to visualize myself at the various places and how I'll be feeling and what I'll be doing. So that's, I think it's important. And Bigfoot told me this more than anything. It's important to visualize yourself at a low point and kind of all of the things you're going to be feeling at that point, and how you're just absolutely certain that there's no way it can go on. And then visualize yourself, putting your pack together and getting up and going. And that, I think, is maybe the true key to a 200, is going even when you're absolutely sure you can't.
It's well said. That's a beautiful way to think about it. And I mean, I feel like that's also one of those metaphors for life too, that we can learn from running. It is how to cope with our existence. Well, it's been fun learning about your journey from doing triathlons and then getting into the ultra scene. I'm so glad that all those runners who had the 200-mile experience, so that they could inspire you into this sport, and that led to me getting to meet you. And I will be seeing you at Moab. I will be volunteering at 2 aid stations. So I look forward to making sure that I see you 2 different times along the course. That'll be to help get you towards the finish line. Well, it's so much fun to talk with you. Thank you for taking time away from your vacation to share your journey with us. And I look forward to seeing you at Moab, and I'll see you on the trails. Thanks a lot, Scott.
All right. Thanks, Wes.
Thank you for coming on Ultra Origins, Scott. If you have recently finished your first Ultra or recently completed a major new distance and would like to share your story here on Ultra Origins, go to onwardendurance.com and click on Ultra Origins at the top of the page. Thank you for watching. I look forward to sharing more Ultra Origins stories with you.